Wynne Nuffield Scholar, has been one of the most influential figures in English agriculture. So I'll just welcome Wynne to the podium, knowing that he will both entertain and inform you. Wynne, welcome to Australia.
Thank you, Tim. Can you all hear me? Good. Well, fellow Nuffield scholars, guests, sponsors, ladies and gentlemen, and in particular, the fellows partners, I was delighted that you are innovative and have a briefing session for the partners. So I thought that was a very good lesson for us to learn. Thank you for the honour, really, of coming in this evening and delivering the George Wilson Oration. I only met him very, very briefly indeed at the conference in Surrey Hill. But it is interesting that in the information about him in front of you, they refer to the Welsh Plant Breeding Station, and that actually has now merged with the university. So one of my sort of areas of remit now covers that August organisation. I'm particularly pleased as well to be able to join the 2011 scholars for your presentations today. I really, really did enjoy your presentation, very professional, very thorough, very informative, and also look forward to tomorrow's papers. But also nice that the 2012 scholars are here. It's a nice idea. Thank you, Nuffield Australia, for organising the conference. Really, I really have had a week here already. I'm looking forward to the next 2 weeks. It's all new and a very, very interesting learning curve so far. And I'd really like to thank particularly Brendan and Robin Smart for organising an excellent trip in the outback for a, well, I don't know how you explain it, I suppose, elite, promising, fit, hunters, but we had a fantastic time for a week. There's a Queenslander, a New South Walian, Victorians, South Australians, Canadians, New Zealanders, Scottish, English, and a Welshman. What a fantastic combination. And one of the true spirits of Nuffield is being grouped together in that many of us. There was an incredible amount of learning and banter, and that very much also what Nuffield's about. When Jim contacted me by email, I sort of picked it up on my iPhone. I was in Anglesey, and I thought I'd better reply to this because I thought the out of email contact. Wales can be a little bit like the outback when it comes to telecommunications. And I said yes in haste, without really thinking what on earth did I let myself in for. I asked Jim, how long do you want me to speak? What's their concentration span? He said 15 minutes. But don't assume that is 15 consecutive minutes. It reminds me of that great pioneer of heart transplant surgery, Professor Christian Bernard, who was doing a lecture tour in the States in the early 70s. He did about 20 universities. He was traveling from Chicago to Wisconsin, feeling a bit tired in the back. He had the same chauffeur. The chauffeur said, you know what, Prof, I've heard that talk so many times, I know it off by heart. Now the questions are very similar, but answer them. Christian Bernard said, I'll tell you what, he's a driver, I'm feeling a bit tired. You give the speech and I'll put your uniform and sit at the back of the theatre and have a sleep. Everything went fine. Superb presentation, same old questions, bang, 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 until I'm looking around and I look at the eminent person, Max Gelbas, yesterday. He looked at this eminent person and said, I'm very surprised there's an eminent person like you ask such a simple question. I shall ask my taxi driver in the back to 2 morals, or 3 morals really, never be complacent. Secondly, there'll always be a new angle on any question. And thirdly, that's why I always enjoy travelling with international scholars. There's always a new angle on things. And I really wouldn't like people to go away with the thought that I'm thinking that Brendan Smart is my chauffeur either. This time of year we'd be welcoming my previous role new students to the college, amongst many other messages. Mustn't leave on this in case I go over. Messages would be my important purpose of giving students a very good education, I would tell them, is because you will be working for my pension. I am now, as object of gratuitous married. My two daughters are married to former students of the college. I am now in that privileged position of having two students who will be deciding which nursing home I go to. I only hope that I've treated them with respect. It's a very important lesson for many farmers who have difficulty in handing over to their sons. And the son-in-law that we had a glance at about 2 weeks ago, I looked at it, and when you're looking at a student file thinking, God, this person's going to be the father of my grandchildren. Certainly forget the A stars and all these sort of things. I just saw on this file his year industry, he spent abroad. I thought, God, this guy's got initiative. God, he spent 6 months in South Australia and 6 months in New Zealand. I thought, he's a tremendous diplomat. This lad will do the business. There's a very exciting conference programme. I just want to sort of run over 1 or 2 areas, particularly to do maybe with the issue of population, with policies, and with people. Nuffield and all these sort of organisations are to do with people. But I would want to start really, we really have had a financial crisis. We're still having a financial crisis in Europe. But in the financial crisis of 2008, it is very important to remember that events move so quickly from impossible to inevitable that they never went through improbable at all. Christine Lagarde, the head of IMF, quoted in yesterday's paper, talking about Europe in particular, where the euro is under some pressure, political dysfunction in Europe was feeding policy indecision at this dangerous phase. Now it did set me thinking, what if that was food? What if we had really hashed the food industry globally as badly as that sector? And whatever people say about the predictability of banking, there must be poor leadership and there must have been atrocious governance and lack of corporate and social responsibilities. And I think that's one key message to you as young Nuffields and future Nuffields. There are very good examples of companies who have a good corporate and social responsibility. But let's look very quickly. There is an old Byzantine proverb. A man who has food has many problems. A man who has none has but one problem. I should say before I talk about population actually that full stomach make less babies. And I think Don was talking about plateauing this afternoon, the population. Of course, more food, less babies, so I should be watching your eating habits. We have 7 billion, we reckon we hit it this year, I have passed it. And we were told by Helen today 8 billion by 2030. You can hang on to that number for a bit. And 9 billion plateauing in future. 925 million are hungry. 1 billion have hidden hunger, i.e. lack of particular micronutrients. 1 billion are obese and adding to health costs. And in fact, Peter Nixon was a gentleman who said, you can't say Australians are obese. You can say that they're voluptuously adipose, but not obese. But could we say that even now we have sorted out food security and food issues? Another 1.25 billion have no access to clean water. World grain stocks have reduced to the 1960 levels. And we have challenges with heard about populations in China and India today, 40% of the future population with 15% of the land. So there are issues of poverty and distribution, I realise that, but we really do have some challenges indeed in feeding those. And I look forward really to the conference and some of the solutions. And we have to remind ourselves all the time that mankind depends on that top 6 inches of soil and the fact that it rains. And I certainly have learnt to appreciate that point after this week. I mean, when we see that the USDA output for this year, 36% of the grain was going to go to ethanol, I mean, we really have a situation now where the price of grain is almost linked to the price of oil and the price of energy, and will be so in the future, which is fine for us. Americans, 7% of their income goes on food, in Britain is about 9%, in Australia is about 11%. We start going into countries like China, where the expenditure is about 30% on food of their total income, and countries like Kenya is pushing about 45 to 50%. Any hike in grain prices immediately pushes more people into poverty. So I think it's very important that's the population. In the UK this year, we had a report by the Chief Scientist, The Future of Food and Farming, Challenges and Choices for Global Sustainability. Fantastic report. I suggest, if you haven't, that you do try and get hold of it. Delighted, because it's only about 80 years ago since a Minister of Agriculture was at Harvard saying that food security is not an issue. You know, don't push it, it's not an issue. But Beddington in his report sets out quite a number of drivers for chronic food insecurity and comes up with this term, the perfect storm of food, water and energy insecurity coming together in one go. And there are recommendations in that report and some suggestions indeed. They do suggest that food as a commodity should not be treated like any other commodity. It's not only about nutrition, economics and food security, but there are cultural and religious issues as well, and we have to appreciate that. They fall short of advocating any market intervention. Max asked a question this afternoon about the optimism about food that which farmers be sharing in that increased revenue. And I think that is a very important issue. And one of the reports, certainly a Chatham House report that was published earlier this year, really makes that point that we really need to alter the balance of risk and reward on the food supply chain. It is certainly not equitable currently for the farming end, which takes more risk. And the report ends up with this notion of intensive sustainability, that we must farm the good lands better so that we can allocate other land for environment. And I think the challenge certainly to us is to get policies and to encourage the politicians to get policies which brings agriculture, food, land use and the environment together as one. The trouble is, when I talk to civil servants, they say, well, that's impossible, that's very, very difficult. But if we don't do that, it makes it very difficult for farmers to move forward, because an NGO, a single interest group who's interested in this, that or the other, can drive a coach and horses and make our life very, very, very difficult. And unfortunately, certainly our politicians tend to listen to large vested interests rather than the smaller number of agricultural quotas. Moving obviously in education, research is an extremely important issue, and I know that Ian McIntosh 2 years ago referred to that issue. Certainly in terms of university education, we are making and we want evidence-based policies, we want evidence-based science. Indeed, in the European Union, we are trying to move from a subsidy-driven agriculture to a market-driven agriculture, and indeed a knowledge-driven agriculture. And somewhere further down the line, we want to move from an oil economy to a bioeconomy. And that is where there are huge opportunities coming in for biotechnology. Biotechnology will be our biggest industries from about 10 years down the line to the end of this century. Sadly, the UK, and I understand South Australia as well, I mean, are not really in the business of allowing the use of GM technology. I mean, this is a very, very difficult situation. I don't think Europe or the politicians have the courage to take that one on, and they might devolve it to member states. It is really, really difficult. It's very interesting that Beddington in his report suggests that when there's new technology, we must work out the cost of not using that technology, the cost of food and the cost of the environment, and make that abundantly clear to everybody so that they make an informed decision, not a narrow-based decision. But I mentioned research, and I mentioned the 1 billion in the next 20 years. Our productivity in the UK is plateauing. And it's almost 20 years ago since we had severe cuts in research. So really the time lag between research and the benefits of research is about 20 years. So really, globally, we need to get very, very serious about spending far more money on the strategic and applied research in order to alleviate what could be very, very serious issues. We are very strong in the UK on basic research, blue skies research, like we're not very good at the strategic and the applied research. And very often, the science push and the industry pull miss each other because it's not been joined up, because we don't have a continuum of research, development, extension and knowledge transfer. I'm not going to touch on policies, but we had an interesting paper from Bill O'Keefe this morning on policies, the impact of policies in Ireland. The cap is under review. But if I quote a statistic, in 1984 when quotas came in, Ireland were producing 5 billion litres, New Zealand were producing 5 billion litres of milk. Today, Ireland are still producing 5 billion litres of milk, New Zealand are producing 18 billion litres of milk. That is the importance of getting policies that really address not just a local issue, a national issue, but an international global food supply. Lots of issues. Einstein would always be quoted saying, imagination is more important than knowledge, but imagination is how we apply that knowledge. We need to be creative, and I like to see Nuffield scholars in a relaxed mode because they are in a creative mode. The illiterates of the 21st century will be those who can't, not those who can't read and write, but those who can't learn and relearn. And obviously getting qualified is relatively easy, even at Harvard, which set an incredibly high standard. The challenge is, in any position, staying qualified. And I think this is where Nuffield has a very, very, very important role to play. We've got the Nuffield scholars, we want you to be Nuffield graduates, we've got the Nuffield family. I suppose I'm rapidly running to Nuffield geriatric or something. Have you seen that Land Rover in wherever we were, Arcarola with adventure before dementia? I thought, God, that was a big But we are talking about leadership, and I'm involved with a leadership program in the UK, and it's very difficult to define leadership. We have a lot now. Governance is important. You will be members of boards of organisation, you as scholars. Governance is important, leadership is important, management is important, technology. Really, what is the difference between a good leader and a good manager? It's really very difficult. I've got 1 or 2 points here. Leadership is an art. Management is a science, which immediately means it's more difficult really to train and develop leaders than managers. Leaders lead people, managers lead things. Leaders are agents of change. Managers deal with the status quo. Leaders empower, managers control. Leaders listen, managers talk. Leaders make time, managers are busy. Leaders experiment, managers create routine. So it is important to think about that. We do try and think of definitions, how leadership does differ from management. And certainly we have a great role in universities, colleges, whatever we have in globally, really, to try and accredit the learning that you think is important. We tend to be very academically sort of thinking, and I'm not an academic. I hasten to add, I'm a manager and leader of agricultural education. The team all week have been referring to me as the academic, which I thought was a term of respect and endearment. Until I landed here and didn't fall for that bloody. But I understand that you as Nuffield, Australia, are working with Charles Sturge University to try and get the Nuffield Scholarship accredited as a piece of qualification. And I know that Nuffield UK have been in some discussion with Harper Adams. We've got the Worshipful Company of Farmers that we could accredit. It's very, very important that we are seen as an industry to be continually developing ourselves. Because if, certainly in the UK, we have been perceived as an industry very poorly committed to training. You will not attract young people into an industry if you're not committed to training and developing people. We have tried very hard in the UK to get this notion of a professional agri, and thankfully the Institute of Agricultural Management took it on, but a lot of resistance. The situation we had at Harper Adams, the students doing one course would become chartered surveyors, those doing engineering would be chartered engineers, those doing management would be chartered institute of management, and the agri students would tell me, well, what are we? You know, it's very important with young people, dinner parties and all this. And we still haven't pushed that point through with the industry. And really, you as youngsters, young Nuffields, do push these and get recognition for your talents and your worth. We will not attract young people of the calibre that we require into the industry. Nobody overviews what's going on in certainly UK universities. Harper Adams is unique in being the only university with a Bachelor of Engineering in Agricultural Engineering. UK produces 20,000 engineers, China produces 400,000 engineers a year. You know, it doesn't take a lot of thinking and extrapolating to see where it's at, and that's only one country. But really, we have a fantastic family in Nuffield. I think your Contemporary Scholars Programme is excellent. The Global Leaders Programme is excellent. I'm delighted to hear that we're linking up with the Eisenhower Group from time to time. There are links with the Netherlands. I really think that Nuffield can have an even greater role to play in future on this very, very important policy agenda. To finish, can we feed those 6 billion, not 7 billion, or soon to be 8 billion? Well, I'm not really in the business of forecasting, particularly about the future. But I would, probably missed that. I think farmers can deliver. I think scientists can deliver. I'm not sure yet whether we have the political will, because we're talking about 20 to 30 years spans, and we're not convinced that we can get the policies to deliver. So please, Nuffield scholars, do impress and make your feelings known, particularly the young ones amongst you, because you're on this planet for a little bit longer than I am. So thank you very much indeed for the opportunity of addressing you this evening, and really looking forward to the next 2 weeks. And I'm delighted now I can enjoy my meal. Thank you.